"You can't charge me $10 for strawberries I grew myself," I said, staring at the booths set up dead center in my turnip field. The woman in front of me blinked. "Karen said this was community property," she replied before asking if I wanted a receipt. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a full-on land hijack, and Karen had just declared war on the wrong guy. It had started off as a normal Saturday morning. I had planned to do some irrigation checks and maybe trim the orchard before the heat kicked in. But when I turned the bend past my barn and onto the eastern slope of my property, my jaw dropped. Dozens of tents stretched out like a carnival midway, dotted with banners, balloons, baskets of peaches, hand-knitted scarves, and an ice cream truck that was actively leaking onto my soil. Cars were parked all along the dirt road, on my fencing, near my corn rows, and blocking the livestock trail. There were toddlers chasing goats, someone selling CBD dog treats, and 3 teens doing a TikTok dance next to my irrigation pump. I hit the brakes so hard my truck skidded in the gravel. For a moment, I just stared, blinking, thinking maybe I'd driven onto the wrong land. But no, this was mine. My fence posts, my hay bales being used as makeshift benches, and right at the far edge of it all stood a plastic folding table draped in linen with a clipboard and a big laminated sign that said Willow Creek HOA Farmers Market Vendor Check-In. And behind it was the Queen herself, Karen Holbrook, in a sun hat the size of a kiddie pool and a megaphone dangling off her arm. I stormed across the grass, brushing past a man trying to sell me microgreens and a woman hawking organic lip balm. A few people smiled politely at me. I didn't smile back. I didn't even blink. When I reached Karen, I didn't even speak at first, just pointed at the hay bales and then at her. She greeted me like a neighbor at a garden party. "Jack, isn't this just adorable? We had such a great turnout for our soft launch. Next weekend's the big event. You should sign up for a booth. Eggs, maybe? You're on my land," I said flatly. "Every square inch of this is my private property." Karen raised an eyebrow like I'd said something quaint. "Oh, Jack, we assumed you'd be fine with it." "It's just a community event. Everyone benefits. Local commerce, fresh produce, social connection. It's practically charity." I didn't laugh, though it might have been funny if I weren't actively losing my mind. "Did you ask me?" I said. "Did you file a permit, contact zoning, health inspectors, get fire clearance? Because you've got propane grills near my hay, kids playing in my drainage ditch, and 30 cars parked in front of my livestock gate." She waved her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "The board approved it." "What board? This isn't HOA land. This is farm-zoned agricultural, and last I checked, your HOA doesn't extend past Maple Drive." Karen stiffened. "We interpreted the boundary lines as shared use. You interpreted wrong." She leaned forward, voice dropping. "Jack, don't make this ugly. We've had several complaints about you being difficult." "I'm about to become impossible," I snapped. "Get these people off my land." She folded her arms. "Then file a complaint. See where that gets you." So I did, right after I walked back to my truck, fuming, and took out my drone case. I bought the thing originally to monitor my orchard, but today it was about to become my best legal ally. I launched it into the air, flying a wide loop around the market, capturing license plates, vendor setups, electrical cords running into unauthorized generators, and one guy dumping gray water into my ditch. I recorded it all. Then I called the zoning office. No permits had been filed for any event on my land. Then the health department. No temporary food permit. The fire marshal hadn't been notified of any large-scale gatherings in the area. When I gave my coordinates, I could practically hear the clerk's eyebrows hit the ceiling. By sunset, I had photos, videos, phone logs, and a list of 15 vendors, all of whom said, "Karen said she rented this land." When I asked what they paid, it ranged from $50 to $200 per weekend. I did some quick math. Karen was pocketing thousands a month, using my property like it was her personal Etsy yard sale. I thought about going nuclear right then, calling the sheriff, dragging every vendor out by their ears. But I paused. If I handled this right, Karen wouldn't just be embarrassed. She'd be exposed. So I bided my time. Sunday morning, the market was gone, no tents, no vendors, just trampled soil, crushed kale, and candy wrappers floating in my pond. Karen had already sent out a chirpy HOA newsletter thanking everyone for supporting local commerce and promising even more excitement next week. She ended it with a fake quote from me. Farmer Jack says he's thrilled to support the community. My blood boiled. The next call I made was to a lawyer I'd worked with during a property line dispute years back. I forwarded the newsletter. He called me 10 minutes later, laughing so hard he couldn't speak. "Let her keep digging," he said. "She just turned a shovel into a backhoe." So I sat back, loaded the footage into a backup drive, and wrote up my report for the county. This was no longer just an unauthorized event. This was fraud, trespassing, zoning violation, tax evasion, and likely a breach of insurance for every vendor involved. I smiled, sipped my coffee, and made plans for next Saturday. Because Karen thought this was over, but I'd only just planted the seeds. By Tuesday morning, I had 3 county departments emailing me back. Each one had questions, and each one had an eyebrow raised so high it could have touched the clouds. The zoning officer was the first to reply. "We have no record of any application, much less approval, for a commercial event on agricultural land at that location." Translation: Karen hadn't even tried to get permission. She didn't file, didn't ask, didn't even Google the laws. Just set up shop like she owned the world and figured no one would challenge her. Typical HOA arrogance. And unfortunately for her, I wasn't one of her little board members. I wasn't intimidated. I had dirt under my nails and county law on my side. I loaded the drone footage onto a thumb drive and labeled it evidence. Willow Creek HOA scam. Then I took a ride into town. The zoning department was a 1-story brick building tucked between a shuttered subway and a water district office that looked like it hadn't seen fresh paint since Reagan. I walked in, dropped the drive on the counter, and said, "You're going to want to see what she's done." An hour later, I was sitting in a meeting room with the county fire inspector, the head of zoning enforcement, and a man from the Department of Environmental Health who looked like he hadn't smiled since 1994. They took notes. They paused the video where Karen was waving her laminated sign and laughing with a vendor. They asked about the propane tank setup near my hay bales. They circled back to the food truck footage where raw meat was being handled without gloves and a young man with no shirt was flipping burgers over open flame with a literal tree branch. The environmental health guy finally spoke. "That's not just a violation. That's a walking salmonella party." I told them everything. How Karen charged vendors, how she used my land without permission, how she made up boundary interpretations and faked HOA authority, how she listed me as a willing supporter in her community newsletter. The zoning head scribbled something on a pad, then looked up. "If all this is true, we've got a solid list of infractions. Zoning, fire code, food handling, public assembly, maybe even small business fraud. But we need one more thing. Written confirmation from you that you never gave permission for any of this, and any documentation you have showing she acted as if she had legal authority." "I've got both," I said. She sent out a newsletter with my name on it. She even put herself down as market coordinator in her HOA email signature. I pulled it from my folder. The zoning officer whistled low. "Well, that's not going to age well for her. We made a plan. They couldn't bust her for what was already done unless they caught her in the act, but they could issue a preemptive stop order based on safety risk. If she went forward with another event, they'd enforce it hard. She's already promoting next Saturday," I said. "You'll have your opportunity." They nodded and promised to handle it by the book. No drama, just paperwork and law. But I didn't want to rely only on official channels. I wanted eyes on her, more than just mine. So I set my drone for daily afternoon flyovers. I watched her yard, her visitors, her smug little HOA meetings under her gazebo with the overpriced cushions and mimosas. I wasn't spying. I was documenting. That's what I told myself anyway. On Wednesday, I got a call from a vendor named Lily who sold homemade jams. She said someone forwarded her the HOA's Facebook post claiming I'd agreed to host the market all season. She was suspicious, especially since Karen had recently raised the booth fee from $50 to $75 for insurance coverage. Lily asked if I knew anything about that. I told her the truth. She's lying. There's no insurance, and there's no season. She doesn't own the land. I do. You've been scammed. Lily cursed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She said she'd demand her money back and tell the others. And I realized then this thing wasn't just a violation of property lines. It was a con job. Karen was running a fake business under the cover of community charm, dragging unsuspecting vendors into her web of lies. People were selling organic bread next to propane tanks on fire-prone hay, and half of them didn't even know they were on illegally occupied land. That evening, I drafted a message and sent it to the entire HOA group. I didn't mince words. I told them the market was unauthorized, the land belonged to me, Karen had no legal right to host events on it, the county had been notified, and anyone returning next Saturday could be fined or investigated. I attached the drone images, the vendor statements, and a warning that any further activity would trigger enforcement. I clicked send and waited. By Thursday morning, the HOA Facebook group was in meltdown. Screenshots came pouring in. Karen deleted comments, then disabled replies. People were asking for refunds. A candle vendor threatened small claims court. One neighbor posted, "Why is this the first I'm hearing Jack owns the land? I've thought the HOA leased it." Another woman replied, "Karen told us it was donated. She said Jack was a silent supporter." A silent supporter of a fraudulent, code-breaking, sideshow market built on top of my radish patch? Then came the kicker. Karen dropped off a printed letter in my mailbox with her perfect cursive signature at the bottom. It read, "Jack, due to your recent hostility and disruption of the HOA's community efforts, we will be reviewing your behavior at the next board meeting. Continued interference may result in HOA fines or escalation." She had the audacity to threaten me with fines for getting mad that she stole my land for a pop-up market. That's when I knew this wasn't just about shutting down the event. It was about exposing Karen's entire operation. She wasn't going to back down, not until someone made her. So I made a new plan. I called the news station. I told them they might want to bring a camera next weekend. Something told me it was going to be very newsworthy. And just to be safe, I cleared my schedule because I had front row seats to the crash landing of Karen's illegal empire. Friday morning brought an unexpected twist. I got a call from a friend of mine named Victor who worked part-time at the county clerk's office. He wasn't supposed to give out unofficial tips, but we'd served together in the Army, and he owed me one from a busted irrigation pump I helped him fix last winter. His voice was low and serious. "You might want to check the business registry. Karen filed something weird. Listed a company with your land as the asset. Looks like she's trying to make it official." I nearly dropped my coffee. The woman had already trespassed, scammed vendors, and ignored zoning laws. And now she was filing paperwork that made it look like I'd given her permission. I thanked him, grabbed my keys, and headed to the county records building before the sun was all the way up. The clerk behind the glass tapped away for a minute, then turned the monitor toward me. Sure enough, there it was, Willow Creek Market LLC, registered by Karen Holbrook. Business type, community agricultural retail. Listed address, my exact property line. I asked if she filed any lease agreement. The clerk shook her head. Nothing on file that gives her legal use of the land, just the business itself. Which, well, that's not how it works. I nodded. She's bluffing with paper, but to an outsider, it might have looked real, which was exactly her plan. I printed a certified copy of the registration and drove straight to my lawyer's office. He reviewed it, squinting through his glasses like he just read a grocery list of felony appetizers. "This is good," he finally said. "Really good. It proves intent. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was fraud, impersonation of ownership, and misrepresentation of private property in a business filing. And she's charging people. That's wire fraud if payments went digital." I told him about the vendor fees, the social media ads, and the phony newsletter where she claimed I supported the event. He jotted notes like he was planning a siege. "Let her open up shop this weekend. We'll have the paperwork ready." If the county doesn't press charges, we'll go civil. I left his office with a fresh sense of purpose. This wasn't just a Karen problem anymore. This was a full-blown legal takedown in progress. That afternoon, I checked the property myself. Sure enough, vendors were already trickling in. Tents were going up. Someone even brought in pallets of squash and tomatoes. A man named Pete was hauling crates labeled raw honey, market special. I asked him who gave permission. He said Karen sent an official-looking form and said it's all been approved by the county. I showed him my ID and said, "You're on private land that's never been approved for anything." Pete looked like someone had just kicked over his beehive. "I paid $200, he muttered. I told him to stick around if he wanted to see justice in action. Saturday morning came fast. I was up at dawn wearing boots and a grin. I didn't even need my drone that day. The whole show was happening live. By 8, there were at least 50 cars parked all over my grass. Tents lined my fence. A woman in a sunflower apron was handing out flyers to customers near my chicken coop, and I could see Karen in her usual oversized hat, waving her clipboard and pointing like she was directing a Broadway show. She had no idea that 3 different county vehicles were en route. I'd gotten confirmation from zoning, the fire department, and the Department of Health. They weren't just sending letters this time. They were sending people with badges and clipboards of their own. At 9:30 sharp, they rolled in, 2 white trucks with county seals on the doors and a red sedan with flashing lights on the dash. I leaned on my fence and watched the gears grind to a halt. It was slow at first. A few vendors noticed and started whispering. Then the health inspector marched up to the Kombucha booth and asked for a permit. A fire marshal inspected a generator and shook his head before taping a violation notice to its side. But the real show started when the lead zoning officer walked up to Karen's booth and asked her one simple question. "Are you the legal leaseholder or owner of this property?" Karen, to her credit, didn't flinch. She pulled out a laminated sheet and said, "Yes, I run Willow Creek Market LLC. This land was made available through community alignment and good neighbor policy." It sounded like a line she'd rehearsed in a mirror. The officer nodded and asked for the lease or deed agreement. Karen handed him a printed piece of paper with some clip art of vegetables on top. He took one look and said, "This isn't a lease. It's a flyer." That's when the crowd started watching. Vendors began muttering. A man with a bread booth was already packing his loaves. A woman selling candles started recording on her phone. The officer asked again, more firmly, "Do you have a lease or written permission from the property owner?" Karen hesitated. Then she said the one thing I'd been waiting for. Jack gave verbal approval. I stepped forward, loud enough for everyone to hear. "No, I did not." Karen whipped around. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The zoning officer turned back to her. "That changes things." He gestured to the deputies standing by the truck. "We're going to need to issue a formal cease and desist, and you may be liable for civil or criminal misrepresentation." "What?" Karen gasped. "You're taking his word over mine." The officer raised an eyebrow. "We're taking the law over everything. And you filed a business with fraudulent property claims. That's a paper trail we can verify." It was chaos after that. Vendors packed up. Customers left in a hurry. One woman shouted at Karen for charging her booth fees under false pretenses. Someone else demanded a refund on handmade dog biscuits. Karen kept yelling about community spirit and supporting local agriculture, but no one was buying it. The fire marshal shut down the grill station. The health inspector took photos of the raw food table, and the zoning officer taped an official closure notice right to Karen's laminated check-in sign. By noon, the entire market was gone. I walked the field, scanning the damage: crushed grass, a broken fence post, some melted ice cream near the irrigation valve. But it was worth it. Karen had pushed the lie so far she couldn't wriggle out of it, not with paperwork, not with Facebook posts, not with her usual charm and smirk routine. And she wasn't just embarrassed. She was under investigation. The sheriff's deputy handed her a copy of the report and said, "Someone from the DA's office may want to ask you a few questions." I didn't say anything to her as she left. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching the last of her empire fold into the back of a borrowed SUV, and I knew something she didn't yet. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the part where things got legal. Sunday was quiet. My field was bare again, save for the torn-up grass and a few plastic zip ties still dangling from the fence where someone had hung a banner. The silence was almost eerie after the circus of the day before. I stood out there for a while with my coffee, watching the breeze move across the soil. It looked peaceful, but I knew the storm hadn't fully passed. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat, not with grace anyway. That woman had the kind of ego that could survive a direct meteor strike, and I had no doubt she was already plotting some half-baked comeback while clutching her wine glass and flipping through HOA bylaws like they were ancient scrolls. Mid-morning, I got a call from Lily, the jam vendor. She told me she received a long, dramatic email from Karen titled, "A temporary setback, not a defeat." Karen claimed the market was being paused due to political overreach and private interference by disgruntled individuals, but would return bigger and better once she resolved minor paperwork inconsistencies. Lily read it out loud, snickering through the whole thing. I asked if Karen had offered anyone refunds. Lily snorted. She offered credit for future vendor space. The woman's delusional. But that wasn't the worst part. Karen had also started spreading a rumor that I was suing the vendors directly and that I'd poisoned the soil to prevent regrowth, which was so far from the truth it didn't even make me angry. It just confirmed what I already knew. She was unraveling. Later that afternoon, I got a knock at the door. A man in a dress shirt and aviator sunglasses introduced himself as an investigator with the county's business fraud unit. He was polite but all business. He asked for a copy of the drone footage, the printed HOA newsletter, Karen's fake lease flyer, and the business registration form from the clerk's office. I handed everything over. He scanned through it silently, occasionally nodding, occasionally making a quiet Then he looked up and said, "She's made this very easy for us." I asked what would happen next. "That depends on her response," he said, "but filing fraudulent claims on land she doesn't own, collecting money under false pretenses, and impersonating legal authority, all of that's prosecutable." The investigator left with a copy of everything. I stood on the porch, watching him drive off, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt the kind of calm that comes from knowing justice is actually moving. On Monday morning, the follow-up finally started landing. The local newspaper ran a small article on the county's investigation into an unauthorized vendor event. They didn't mention Karen by name yet, but they did quote a county official saying, "Property owners are encouraged to report any unauthorized commercial activity." Several violations have recently come to light. I clicked it and saved it, not out of vanity, but because I knew Karen read the local paper cover to cover and would see it too. And I wanted her to feel the walls closing in. Sure enough, by noon, she made her next move. She showed up, not alone either. She brought 2 HOA board members with her, probably hoping strength in numbers would change the equation. They walked up my gravel driveway like they were arriving at a garden tea, dressed in pastels and pearls. Karen didn't knock. She stood there, smiling like nothing had happened. "Jack," she said sweetly, "we'd like to discuss a path forward." I stepped out, closed the door behind me, and leaned on the railing. "What's there to discuss?" I asked. Karen gestured with her hands like she was offering peace between rival nations. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. There's clearly been a misunderstanding, but the market is a cherished community tradition now. People love it, and with your cooperation, we can move forward legally. I'm willing to split a portion of the vendor proceeds with you." A partnership. I stared at her like she'd grown horns. "You want to split profits from a business you fraudulently created on land you trespassed on." Karen blinked. "It's only trespassing if someone files charges, and you haven't. Yet." Her smugness was nuclear grade. The other 2 board members stood awkwardly behind her, clearly realizing this meeting wasn't going how Karen had pitched it. I stepped down from the porch and looked her in the eye. "You're under investigation. I gave the fraud unit everything, including the LLC registration you filed claiming my land. I'm not interested in your profits. I'm interested in watching the county handle you." Karen's smile faltered. You really go that far. For what? Some broken grass and a few tents. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. No. For the lies. For dragging my name into your schemes. For thinking you could take whatever you want just because you run a neighborhood Facebook group. And for making me the villain in your little fairy tale. She tried to recover. This isn't good for anyone, Jack. Especially not the vendors. They'll blame you. They already blame you, I said. I've got the voicemails. For a second, she looked like she might scream. Her lip twitched. Her eyes narrowed. But instead, she turned, muttered something to her bored minions, and walked away. Not a word of apology, not even a fake one. Just wounded pride and angry heels kicking up my driveway dust. That evening, the real punch landed. Victor from the clerk's office texted me a screenshot of a new filing. Karen had attempted to amend her business registration to list a different address, her own backyard, but the system flagged the change as suspicious, and now the entire LLC registration was under administrative review. She was boxed in. No land, no permits, no market, and a growing list of angry vendors asking where their money went. By nightfall, the HOA board issued a public statement saying the Willow Creek market was never officially sanctioned and that any and all vendor communications were made by private citizens acting independently. Translation: they threw her under the bus with both hands and a running start. The vendors weren't buying it. The community Facebook page turned into a war zone. One post had over 400 comments and a dozen angry GFs. Karen stopped replying. By midnight, she was cornered, and she knew it. I went to bed that night knowing one thing for sure. Karen hadn't just lost a market. She'd lost control. The next steps were up to the county now, and I had a front row seat to every single one. The next week rolled in slow, like a thunderstorm on the horizon that everyone knew was coming, but no one could predict exactly when it would hit. The difference now was Karen wasn't just dealing with me. She was under pressure from all sides. Vendors who wanted their money back, neighbors who felt duped, and county officials who weren't amused by her forged paperwork and backyard empire dreams. The woman who once strutted through HOA meetings with a color-coded clipboard and a whistle around her neck was suddenly the face of an unraveling scandal. And the thing about people like Karen is, they can't stand losing control. I spent most of the week cleaning up what the so-called farmers market had left behind. There were busted pallets by the apple trees, zip ties in my fencing, ruts in the grass where trucks had been parked, and even a half-full compost bin someone had just left sitting behind the barn like it was a donation. I hauled out trash bags, fixed broken boards, and patched my irrigation line where someone's grill had melted part of the pipe. It was exhausting but oddly satisfying. Every repair was like erasing another part of the mess she made. And all the while, I kept getting little updates. Lily texted me a screenshot of an email Karen sent to a few vendors claiming the temporary setback was due to jealous local interference. Another vendor emailed me directly, asking if I had any plans to host a real market someday, one that followed the rules. One of them even mailed me a handwritten thank you note with a jar of blackberry jam. Thanks for protecting local growers from HOA chaos, it said. That one made me smile. I wasn't looking to be some kind of folk hero, but it felt good knowing people saw what she did and knew I stood up to it. Then came the news I'd been waiting for. A county press release hit the local bulletin board and news site. It read like a legal cookbook of everything Karen had cooked up. Unauthorized business operation, fraudulent property claims, multiple zoning and health code violations. The cherry on top. The county had launched a formal civil investigation into Willow Creek Market LLC. Karen's little company, her pride and joy, was now flagged for potential tax fraud, property misrepresentation, and illegal vendor income. The press didn't name her directly, yet, but everyone in town already knew, and she knew that they knew. I was in the orchard when I saw her again. She wasn't wearing her usual sun hat or pastel scarf, just jeans and a hoodie pulled low, like she thought she could blend in with the bark and branches. She was standing near the edge of the road, watching me from behind a tree, not trespassing, technically, but not just passing by either. I didn't approach her. I didn't wave. I just kept pruning, letting the silence stretch. After a while, She turned and left. I didn't need to hear what she had to say. Her silence said it all. The next morning, I walked out to check the mailbox and found something sitting on the fence post. It was a ceramic mug filled with wildflowers and a folded note underneath. The handwriting wasn't Karen's. This was clumsy, rushed, almost apologetic. It said, "Not all of us knew what she was doing. Thank you for stopping it. You did the right thing." No name, just that. I looked out over the empty field, still a little battered but returning to normal, and I realized just how close this whole thing came to being permanent. If I hadn't acted, if I had just let it slide, that fake market could have kept growing until it swallowed the whole community under a tarp of lies and lemonade stands. A week later, I went into town for supplies and overheard two people at the general store talking about it. One woman said, "I heard Karen's thinking of stepping down from the HOA board." The other replied, "She better. No one's going to listen to her after that stunt." The first one laughed. "Imagine trying to sell someone's land and then acting like you're the victim. Classic Karen. They didn't even know I was standing behind them in line. I didn't say a word, just paid for my fence staples and left with a grin." By the end of the month, Karen resigned from the HOA board. The official statement was full of sugar and spin, personal time, refocusing on family, grateful for the opportunity. But everyone knew the truth. She wasn't stepping down. She was retreating. The vendors kept sharing their stories. Some were planning to join together for a class action complaint. The county had frozen the business registration for Willow Creek Market, and her online presence was silent, not even a passive-aggressive meme. Just a hollow, echoing absence where once there had been daily updates about lavender soap and raw goat milk. As for me, I finally put up a new sign on the edge of the field. Simple, no nonsense, private property, no events without written permission. But underneath that, in smaller letters, I added something a little more personal. Support local farmers the right way. And just below that, because I couldn't resist, I nailed a small wooden arrow pointing toward the main road. For markets, try the next town over. They have permits. One morning a week later, I found another package on my porch. This one was a basket filled with pickles, bread, and a note that said, "You should run the next market. We'll back you." No signature, but I recognized the handwriting as the guy who'd sold sourdough next to the candle tent. It made me laugh. I wasn't planning on hosting anything anytime soon, but the thought that people still believed in doing things right, that they still wanted to come together for something good, well, that meant more than I expected. The land healed faster than I thought it would. Grass grew back. The ruts faded. Even the chickens seemed less jumpy. The only thing left behind was the story, a lesson written into the dirt, carried in whispers from neighbor to neighbor. Don't assume the quiet guy with the tractor won't fight back. Don't assume a clipboard gives you power. And most of all, don't build your little empire on someone else's soil and expect them not to notice. Karen tried to turn my field into a fake dream wrapped in bunting and sugar-coated lies. But in the end, she forgot the most important rule of any farmer's market. You reap what you sow.